Hello everybody, my name is Zachi Nachshon. I'm a tech lead on the Bazel team under the DevX group within Wix. I have all kinds of OSS projects and publications. You're welcome to check out my site. All right, so a little bit about our story. In this story, we went through a roller coaster for the past 5 years. We migrated from one RBE to another, and this talk will share the experience about how we did it with zero downtime, both times. Chapter 1, an overview of Wix CI, a few numbers. So interesting points about Wix CI. We adopted Bazel since an early version, thanks to Itai Zeidman. We don't have a monorepo. We have scale challenges, both technical and from the developer experience side. We have a large code base, which is quite challenging to manage. Now, nobody is Bazel perfect. So you might ask yourself, isn't Bazel meant for a monorepo? Well, we're not working with a monorepo within Wix. We have an in-house monorepo alternative. It's called the virtual monorepo. It glues together all the 60 repositories that we have. Eventually, it consists of a virtual entity containing the different revisions of each repository. So, and we are working on a monorepo solution, actually. A few numbers about Wix CI. We have 100 million lines of code, 2K developers, 1K daily commits, and those generate 6K daily builds, 350 parallel builds. Now think about migrating to a new RBE provider. You want to run in dual mode. So it means that at peak times during migrations, we had 700 builds running in parallel and 60 virtual monorepos. So the question is, if there are 1,000 commits, why do we have 6,000 daily builds? Let's go over some of our build types. There is the master build type, which is a build type upon a merge to master, PR, a new commit had been issued, PR merge diagram. We want to make sure that every change to a PR is aligned with the master branch. And those are the build types that generate most builds. The cross-repo checks and that trigger all masters. I'll go over them quickly. Those generate 4 times the volume of a machine comparing to master and PR. So cross-repo, eventually it means that once I issue a new commit into a PR, I want to check that other repositories are aligned with my change. So I could trigger like 15 builds. And trigger all master, as you can see, those are build spikes. Those are surges. So triggering on all repositories at once. So what is an RBE and why do we need it? First of all, RBE stands for remote build execution. We need it because it's a concept that allows you to build and test Bazel targets remotely. Now, you could sum it up into 2 points. Eventually, it reduces build durations per repository, on our case, and it helps in minimizes build surges on CI because it allows you to run in parallel. RBE is not only remote executions. It contains also another component, which is a remote cache. Remote cache its job is storing content in the cache so we could retrieve it later on during build times. And there is another with a critical component for Wix because we've used that one and when we started is the result store. Result store store build artifacts that we could use them later on, consume them on the build flow after the build finished. So we consume them asynchronously, the build outputs, in order to promote them later on. Now I'll go over a simplified view of our build pipeline. So a Wix developer issue a commit. We have an elaborate triggering service that will talk about it. a new build is being, build pipeline being created on BuildKite. BuildKite is a CI solution, CI product. The actual Bazel command, the Bazel build, is running on the BuildKite build agent. Now, this command interacts with the remote executors on the RBE provider, and those are writing content to the remote cache or reading content from the remote cache. The build agent reads if the cache exists. If not, it writes, the remote executors are writing the content to the remote cache, and eventually it writes the build output to the result store. So it's a simplified view of our build pipeline. Let's talk about chapter 2, Wix journey through 3 RBE providers. Yeah, everything is fine. So Wix, there are a handful RBE provider out there, and Wix managed to use 3 of those. It took us like 5 years to go from one to another. And as you can see, first migration took 9 months. The second one took 30 days, actually less than 30 days, so we'll go over it.
3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah. So the first RBE provider was Google RBE. We used Google RBE at an alpha stage. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure that we were the actual sole customer of that service, but it felt like it. So eventually Google decided to sunset that service, and we had 1 year grace period to move to another solution. So we went on an adventure. We headed towards the second RBE provider, and during 2022 we did the actual migration. We migrated to the second RBE provider, completed in June 2022, and we had 6 months of quiet time and stabilization. But in December 2022, during the Christmas holidays, they decided that we need to find another solution, and we had less than 30 days to do it. There and back again, A Hobbit's Tale by the Bazel DevX team. So you could see that Bilbo Baggins is searching the Middle-earth web for a new RBE provider. We had to evolve from 0 to hero in 4 weeks' time. So the bad news first, because the previous migration took 9 months, and we had to do it less than 30 days, as I've said, the December holidays. But there are also good news. We were beta tested because of the previous migration. We did all the preparation required for us to migrate faster. And of course, we assembled the Wix team. I could call it the Council of DevX. So what you need to know, who you need on your side when you migrate to a new RBE provider. So you need, first of all the stakeholders that are wrote on this slide, because a collaboration between all of them is important to get a job done eventually. And think about a non-budgeted project, which is an RBE migration that we had like less than 30 days to do at the end of year, and we had to have everybody on board to complete that mission. So if you're thinking about, not in 30 days, but if you're thinking about using RBE and migrating to an RBE, all of those are important stakeholders. So EngFlow to the rescue. Let's see how we made it happen. I'll go over the checklist, challenges, and solutions. So you might ask yourself, migrating to an RBE provider, isn't it just a config change? So it sounds like a simple task, but no. You have a lot of things to consider. You have to provision the cluster. You have to set all your Bazel wiring RC files. If you have a Bazel wrapper, you need to make changes. And we have 60 repositories. We need to make changes on all of those, so it takes time. You need to make sure you have a Dockerized test support and limiting access between production and the cluster, allowing network between all the different components that need to play together. So it's not a simple task. Now, there is a checklist that we made for the RBE migration. You want instant executions to prevent the action queue to build up. You want also Docker-based build step. For our case at Wix, we have a lot of Dockerized tests that we need to make sure IT end-to-ends, that we need to make sure that they are working as expected on the RBE provider. We wanted to have, of course, a built-in autoscaler. We don't want to scale it manually and create pipelines of our own. We wanted to support the idle time, so it will be smart enough to help us to be cost-effective. And eventually you need a feedback loop. When you start, you want a feedback loop because you want to run fast and you want to understand your potential gaps that you need to close. It helps you break the big migration problem into a smaller, manageable one. So you start with the cluster creation. You continue to create your hacky way. You need to create a custom build pipeline on the easiest repository that you could work with. Then you start bubble up failure points. You start with fixing those issues and actually fixing, running again, rinse and repeat style, and you map all those solutions that you find for those issues to be used later on other repositories. So this is a rinse and repeat cycle, and eventually, when you're confident enough, you can continue to create a migration plan. So hopefully, like myself and Antonio, you'll get a green build. The one on top is from BuildKite, and on the bottom is a green build on EngFlow. Success. So what were our biggest challenges? Challenges can be divided into two parts. First part is the stabilization part, and the other part is the migration part. So regarding stabilization, you want to attend to your failing tests, either flakiness, timeouts, port collisions. Now, port collision could lead to the second part, the Dockerized tests. You want the RBE provider that you're moving into will support the Docker network communication if you're allowing such things. Let's say you have managed environment. You have Kubernetes managed environment for your tests. Also, when thinking about the code base, to support multiple RBEs, you want to make the proper adjustment that you could switch between those when needed. And also result store, the component that I've indicated previously, you need to allow reading it only from a single RBE. I'll go over it later on. So the migration itself also had its own challenges. The build setup that you need to create, the same build setup that you have on a previous RBE, you want it to exist on the new one. And you want it to support dual builds. It means that when you're running a build on one RBE, you want to run the same build with the same vector that I've showed you before on the new RBE. And also the cutoff mechanism, because eventually you want to promote artifacts to production only from the RBE you've migrated to, and you're not doing it all at once. You're doing it gradually. And a key factor is the performance. You want to verify that when you migrated to a new RBE, you have the same or better performance. You don't want a degradation of service, of course. So let's talk about the few challenges. One of the challenges is our unit tests in disguise. So we had a few unit tests, we still have those, that are actually end-to-end or integration tests in disguise. Why? Because we have I'll give a short introduction about the different pools that we have at Wix. We have two kind of pools, one for unit test and one for large test, which are the end-to-end ITs. Now, the default pool also runs the Scala compilations. So having a unit test, which isn't a lightweight as it should be, and it's using Dockerized environment, takes and hogs the resources of the machine. So you can see from this graph that we have those spikes. And in order to attend to them, there are all kinds of solutions. We are working on them, but the first and initial solution should be attend to those tests, convert them. Either they are end-to-end IT, so they could run on the expected pool, or not.
If only we had resources in the remote execution API, or in the best. How much resources did actually the test, how much CPU, how much memory, and you know if you need to upgrade or downgrade.
You're talking about the gather metrics, about the resources of those tests, of course. So another challenge is dual building and the promotion cutoff. Now, the dual building, as I've said before, it needs to run on both RBE providers, and cutoff mechanism should be promoting an artifact only from a single RBE provider. Now, we want to measure, while running in dual build, the status, build status. We expect green build on one and green build on the other. Performance regarding build durations. Artifact promotion is the cutoff mechanism. Monitoring and alerts. Behavior should be kept intact for production-wise. It means if I switched an RBE, I expect all production and alerts to be configured on the active RBE. And links and references, of course, for developer experience, it should be seamless. All links leads to the active RBE. So how did we do all of those, especially the dual build and the cutoff mechanism? We have a smart triggering service. I'll go over the flow quickly. So once the commit has been identified, this is a simplified view of we have a build config. Every repository have a definition of you're being built on RBE1, RBE2, and you're being promoted on, let's say, RBE2 in this case. So both builds are running on BuildKite, our CI platform, and both builds are building in parallel on the relevant remote build execution platform. Eventually, once a build completed, there is a build invocation event through a messaging system going to a publisher service. This publisher service promote either from it uses a results or client that I'll talk about in a few minutes. And it reads from either the results or from the first RBE or the second one, and then publish the content further to the registry, Artifactory. So this is in continuation to the previous slide. We'll talk about the results or client. Results store client is in charge of interacting with the results store of the relevant RBE, and it's a library that we have, source-dependent library that we have, that 13 Wix internal services are using it. So how we decide on which RBE we want to pull and use the artifacts from, we have a contextual attribute, a header, which is based on service config that knows how to identify the active RBE. So kind of simplified messaging system. Attend those 13 backend services get the build invocation event. They are using the source-dependent results store client. The results store client already has the config and authentication for all support RBE provider, and then it issue request to the relevant RBE results store. Final chapter. We arrive to the conclusions. So what are the gains of migrating to EngFlow? We reduced by 60% the amount of resources on the default pool, which is the build and unit tests. We reduced by 20% the instances on the large pool. EngFlow has an amazing autoscaler. It does its job, and it does its job in an excellent manner. They have profiling capabilities on the EngFlow analyzer page. It helps our developers to pinpoint all kinds of optimization points and support. They have amazing support, and Antonio is here as a proof for the amazing support that they give us. And I want to say that EngFlow engineers has a vast experience in Bazel and engineering expertise, and they are very highly available. So migrating to a new RBE provider with zero downtime. It's possible. You need the right checklist. You need the correct provider to be your partner for the journey, for the migration journey, and eventually you'll do the unimaginable.